Well, we're continuing our study in Exodus. Exodus is a part, obviously, of the Old Testament. When we think about what the Old Testament is supposed to mean to us, what are we supposed to think, or what might you think? It's there for our learning. There's examples there that teach us. We have to be, I think, careful as to, I think, getting really difficult and tough with the Israelites. They certainly deserve it, but in many respects, no more than we do. The rebellion that they show a lot of times is seen in our own lives. So it's teaching us not just about them and how the law led us to Christ, but about how we also need the law. And we've talked about that before. They have left captivity, and they've been there in captivity some 400 years. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. You know, this country hasn't had people arriving here for much longer than that. I don't know, Plymouth Rock, when is that? 1600-something? 1620. Well, 16020 then. Yeah. Anyway, that's about 400 years. And we haven't been a country for that much time. But I was just thinking about that, and I was thinking about the side of that might cause me to think or excuse them a little bit or try to understand what they were going through when it was time to go. Now, what might be something that would be a positive thing that might cause them to think, hey, this is okay, we're glad we're out. Just think about it. You're there, you're in captivity, you're a slave. You put yourself there. Yeah, go ahead, Jackie. Mm-hmm. Okay, so something good that came out of it, it was that, you know, God's listening to them. He responded to their cry through Moses. What else? Anything else you might think of? Oh, when they're out. Okay, so that's a good thing. That's an interesting way of getting to that one, Dave. Anything else? These are good. Anybody else got any ideas about, you know, why they might have thought this is a good thing that we're gone? Okay. Whatever a slave was. I mean, I'm not trying to make it easy in terms of what it was like, but, you know, they lived there. They seemed to have places to live. And they probably weren't the greatest, but at the same time, what? It was a place to live. And that might have seemed like a pretty good thing to them, especially when we start looking at the negative side. And the negative side is once they're gone, what might they be happy or glad about? Well, what made them upset at times? They didn't have enough food, or their needs were not being met. Let's just be general about it. They didn't have water either, you know. So that was another one. And that shows up again a little bit later on. What else? Just, you know, you're trying to imagine you lived for 400 years, and that's a lot of generations. You wouldn't have probably lived there for that long, but you would have been there for a number of years. Go ahead, James. Mm-hmm.
They actually, when they first had their flocks, and they were just going all over the place. So that amount of time, they weren't used to that kind of traveling.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this would be kind of a new thing. They're back in the days of their dad, and when the 12 sons were alive, they would do a lot of traveling around. They were considered, I guess, nomads, for want of a better description. I suppose you could probably dispute that to a certain extent. But nevertheless, you know, that's part of what contributed to what was going on. I'm trying in my own mind to understand what comes up in this lesson that we have today, and that is, why are they complaining? And I can think of reasons why it's reasonable as to their complaining. Go ahead, Mitch.
I just think change is always difficult.
Yeah. Sure. Right.
So, I think you kind of see that characteristic here, that there were things that were occurring. God was bringing them through deliverance, but it wasn't quite exactly what they thought or what they used to.
Sure. Yeah, and so there are certain things, you'd think that would promote a rather upbeat kind of attitude that God is leading them. But nevertheless, they weren't happy. And it's very easy to say, well, wait a minute, they were in Egypt, they were slaves, and they get out. I just don't get it. Well, like Mitch says, change is something that's very difficult to get used to. Any other, again, try to put yourself there. One of those people. Go ahead, Daniel.
Even though they were slaves, Egypt during this time was very prosperous in power. Other than being a slave, it was probably a nice place to live.
Well, they certainly came out okay. Due to the plagues that the Lord put upon them, the people warmed up to them a little bit, and they came out with goods and ways to sort of live their lives. But at the same time, it's not like they're moving to some big city where there's all kinds of malls and shopping. They're out there wandering around in the wilderness. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Mona. Right.
They just went through the motions, did their sacrifice, and God now is expecting them to have relationships
Yeah.
and take some autonomy and
Yeah.
do things and be obedient and show faithfulness, and that's a lot to ask from anybody. Besides, they're not just along with the Holy
Sure. Right. And
Spirit. They weren't ready for that kind of relationship. They didn't know what it was.
yeah, they certainly didn't behave like they were ready for it, did they? And that kind of brings me to the next thing. When you think about the individuals that are there, and if you were seeing this as a play, you have God, you have Moses and Aaron and Miriam, and you have the people. Now, what role do these individuals play? They each have a role that's been kind of nailed down. What was God doing? We've already talked about that. Planner and leading them. And it seems like a pretty good deal the way that he is leading them with the cloud and the pillar of fire. I don't know how long you'd be impressed with that. I guess like anything, it becomes kind of old and stale. They seem to have that kind of problem, or at least you can almost understand, or you wonder why. If God is leading them, why is it they are unhappy? That ought to be good enough for them. And it ought to be good enough for me, and it ought to be good enough for you. But it's not the sort of thing that we generally sort of leap to as a positive thing, where someone says, well, look, here's what God says, you just do that. I've never seen people, smile a whole lot and go, oh yeah, I've never thought of that. Because we just don't think that way that often. We know God can lead us, but we just don't let him lead us sometimes. Okay, so what about, I don't know if I mentioned Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. What were their roles? Just in general. You don't have to quote a passage or anything. Okay. He was part of this leadership group. Miriam, over in Micah chapter 6 and verse 4, is described as part of the group that helped lead them out. We see a role that she plays. We'll see in the questions this evening. But they're there, and Moses is off of the time. Who is he having to deal with directly? God, and then the people. And who are the easiest people to get along with? Or who are the easiest? Well, I've already said it, or given you implied the answer. God just says, look, this is what you do. I'm taking care of you. Everything's going to be okay if you just believe me. And then Moses tells that to the people, or Aaron tells that to the people. And that, I guess, when I look at this, okay, now what's their role? And we've already established, I think, what their role is. The people. And their role is to do what? Follow. It's follow. Get up. Remember when they were there just on the edge of the Red Sea, and what were they told to do? Go forth. And that's all they had to do. So Moses has got his stick up there, and he's holding it and keeping the sea back, and God is making sure that it's happening. All they got to do, I suspect there'd be some packing up that would have to be a part of that. But they just have to go forth. All right, so when you look at this, you see the story of the Exodus, in our effort to try to learn something from it for us. We learn about God because we learn about His greatness, and that brings us to question number 1, and that is I wanted you to read through the words of the song sung by the people of Israel as recorded in chapter 15, 1 and verse 18. And then I say, would you please, maybe just describe in a couple of sentences what you think it means. Okay, what's it called? Well, it is. I think it has to do with victory. It's a strong victorious theme, but it says Moses and the sons of Israel sang this song to the Lord, and so what it's come to be known as the Song of Moses. But the people were also very much part of it. Okay, so did anyone pick a couple of verses out, or actually put together a couple of sentences to think what it is, or to show in some ways what we're supposed to get out of this song, or what they were trying to convey with this song? Okay, keep leaning, Edwina. Yeah.
The Lord is my strength and song, and He has become my salvation. He is my God, and I will declare Him in habitation. My father's God, and I will exalt Him.
And how does that impress you? What the praising God. In fact, if you go through every bit of this song, I'm hard pressed to find anything that's negative in that song. And so when the people are that way, or when your life is that way, I mean, you read this and you can't believe what's going to be happening in just a chapter or two. Because look at, they're just, I put down verse 2, the Lord is my strength and song, and He has become my salvation. Is that one of the verses you read, Edwina? Okay. All right, so, and it says, the Lord is a warrior, the Lord is His name. Now, I skipped over in verse 13, I wrote that out. I said, in thy loving kindness thou hast led the people whom thou hast redeemed. In thy strength thou hast guided them to the holy habitation. Does this sound like a negative group here? No, it sounded like they're just pretty juiced up. This is good. Now, if we credit Moses with writing it, at least we understand that they very much participated in it. And so, again, that begins to raise questions in terms of our understanding. Because we see that, and this is kind of an old story that, I certainly go over a lot, and that is, we see people this way, and we just think, how could this happen to where they just go down the tube so easily? And it seems like they do. And then what will I usually say in following that? I'm not expecting for you guys to have memorized anything I've said, but I usually will say that's what we got to do, right? Isn't that we have to realize that life is going to be great, and then life is not going to be so great after it. That's just the way it seems to follow. Now, you'd kind of look at this, and you maybe would think, well, if they could have just kept that attitude, that had to help some. And so you wonder, again, how does that happen? Well, how does it happen for you? I'm not asking for anybody to tell a sad story or anything like that, but go ahead, Christina. Yeah.
This happened, you watched Pharaoh's chariots
Sure.
being demolished. Okay, super cool.
This really looks like a real high, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now we're wandering.
Yeah.
There's nothing magnificent happening.
Sure, you got to get the kids fed, and and then we.
Today we got to, put up the tent.
Sure.
Fire, got to find food.
Sure.
Do all the things.
Right. And so it's easy to get sidetracked then, I guess. Do we all agree with that? Or do you think that you'd be saying, well, isn't this great? Let's go. It's hot today, but that doesn't bother me because I love the Lord. No. Okay. So they're very, very happy at this stage because they just experienced a lifetime high, I suppose. They watched these people that had been lording it over them for 400 years, the army of these people getting washed away in a miraculous parting of the seas. All right, now, what else? Yeah, go ahead, Lupe.
Having this pillar
Right. Well, I assume they do. I think for me and you, we're kind of just following along in the book and, reading this narrative, and that's a part of it. But I'm guessing the way I am and the way you are and the rest of us are, a lot of times, those are the sort of things that can easily get ignored. And again, we ought to be thinking about this marvelous blessing that we have in being in Christ. We should be remembering that every day, every hour. But as Christina says, there are things that get in the way. And mastering those things and still having great trust in God is sometimes, I think, easier said than done. And so I think in some ways I'm pretty sympathetic, to these people and, what's going on with them. Who is Miriam? She's there in chapter 15. She's described. Well, I think she's leader of the dance troupe, Dave. Yeah. 15:20. And Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with the timbrels and with dancing. So they're not only reading and singing, then there's also ladies who are celebrating with dance. All right? Now, again, this is a lady who is included in Micah's writings as being, very significant. Maybe she was very significant for the women. I don't know. But she was very much a part of, on the inside of things. And at one point, she and her brother tried to pull a coup on Moses. And God gets very, very upset with that. And she ends up with leprosy. So it wasn't just all I'm in charge here with the other two big guys here. She and Aaron tried to upend Moses, because what did people do as far as Moses was concerned, and the good things and the bad things that happened, or certainly the bad things?
He was the younger brother, so he was kind of an upstart because Aaron was 3 years older than he was. Miriam had to be 8 or 10 years.
Yeah, so that would certainly be the dynamic that you could see as it was involved in there. We don't really know too much about their relationship and what was actually going on with them, but I think that's realistic, though, Dave. Yeah, what else?
Well, when things went bad, people got mad at Moses.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, they got mad at Moses. And so when they got mad at Moses, what did Moses do? He complained to God. So, there's quite a chain of activity here that looms itself as being something not really all that positive. But nevertheless, what we're seeing here is, as we visualize what's going on, without getting into a lot of the details about it, we have God leading, we have the direction coming from Moses and Aaron specifically. Miriam's involved in it somehow. And then we have the people. And so everybody's got their responsibility. And if everybody follows their responsibility, then things are generally, probably, you'd expect them to be okay. But once it starts breaking down, then you've got unrest and you got problems. Okay. Question 3 says, describe the miracle recorded in chapter 15, 22 to 26. And verse 25 says God tested them. How so? Okay, so this in a few short days happens to them, and this is when they begin to have to deal with some of these things. Now remember, they've seen God do a lot of things, haven't they? More miracles than anybody would expect to see in a lifetime. And so based on that, given the normality of, okay, what's it like to be in a place like this, with all this stuff going on, we ought to be able to expect God might what? Give us water. If we need water, He'll give us water. Okay, so let's just go ahead. Someone read that for us. It's such a short one. Beginning at 22 down through verse 26. Travis, would you read, please? Nice and loud. Yeah, keep on down to going to 26, all through it.
There he made them a
Statute. Yeah.
statute,
Yeah.
and regulation, and there he tested them. And he said, you give earnest heed to the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes. I will put none of these diseases on you, which I have put on the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer.
Okay, so there's the miracle. It obviously is miraculous. I'm sure many people have tried to figure out, well, what kind of tree was this? That gets thrown into the water. The water is undrinkable. I think the thing that we do is understanding, again, in context, what's been happening. It's one miracle after another. So if God decides to do it this way, why should we be shocked? So there they are. And so now they got water. But again, it's been 3 days since what happened. There was 3 days they're mentioned there somewhere. Since the Red Sea. I mean, you'd think that that'd still be on the bulletin or something, you know. And here they are, and now they don't have water. Now, why is that a reasonable thing, let's just say from kind of a secular perspective, for them to be bothered by that? Yeah, and so, you know, and they're looking out there and they're seeing the desert, and they're thinking, man, we just ran across some water here, and now we can't drink it. Now look what we got to look forward to. You know, water becomes an issue, and understandably so. But what should they be remembering? And this is our lesson too. What should they be remembering? He said he would provide. He got us out of Egypt. He got us through the sea. I bet he can do this. But, you know, again, it says they complained. They grumbled at Moses, and they said, well, what should we drink? And then he cries out to the Lord, and then that's when the Lord tells him to get this tree, and he throws it in the water, and now the tree makes the water, or God makes the water, good to eat. So, again, what's now their part of it as it's described in verse 26?
They have to obey God.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'll just bring all the plagues on you that I just put on the Egyptians.
Yeah, and I will, and he says, if you guys will just go with the program here, I will put none of the diseases on you. Now, I remember there was someone who looked at that verse and they said, you know, the people were generally a healthy people, and that's because they ate so well, and so that's what God's talking about there. Now, you know, we could make an argument about that, and certainly I've read books where it has, you know, these biblical diets. But nevertheless, that really wasn't the issue here. This wasn't about what? Okay, here's how you should properly eat. He just says, if you will do what I say and obey me, then I promise I'm going to keep leading you. I'm not going to put you in a place where you're going to suffer for very long. But he is testing them. So how is he testing them? And of course, you probably look at your own life and you think, you know, I have tests at times that God gives me. So what's the purpose of this then for these people? What's he doing? Go ahead, Dan.
So, if you think about how long they were without water before they complained to Moses,
Yeah.
as soon as they needed something, I mean, as soon as you're thirsty and there's no water, why don't they know, well, God's going to give us water. All we have to do is figure out where it's going to come from. Why do they wait so long before they finally, well, now we have to go to Moses, and why did they just go to God?
Well, I think, you know, you're answering your own question. I mean, in a way. I mean, it would seem like that would be the only thing that they would do. So why is it? This is the test. It says they're being tested. So what's the test? Oh, sorry. Is that your hand, Ian? Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
They could see him, in a sense, through the pillar of fire and cloud.
Sure.
But that's why they always address
Right.
They go to Moses and complain to him.
Right.
That's why they said, why did you lead us into the desert to die?
Yeah, he was the point man, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was the man in charge as far as.
Right.
And so the Lord at this point is slowly refining Israel, testing their faith, and seeing who is going to be a part of it.
Right.
I've given you this, I've established this covenant. This is what's going to happen. I think what's interesting is that it's not simply, I will keep these diseases from you. He says, I, the Lord, am your healer.
Right.
He is healing these people, in a physical and spiritual.
Yeah. And so he's going to take care of that as well.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, he's saying, what I've demonstrated from the beginning is I will do what? I promise I will take care of you, but your role is to obey and put your trust and your faith in me. Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
I think this is the beginning. It's the beginning of, from our perspective, why didn't Jesus come sooner? Well, it says that Jesus came at a proper time.
Right.
Well, what was the proper time? People had to be prepared in a certain way. These people have to be prepared in a certain way. I look at that water as him just kind of simply setting up the situation where he's testing them in what way? He's saying, here are some rules I have. You have the consequences of sin in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates certain mind thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Can't use, right?
Yeah, I got you.
We're going to have to take this step by step.
Right.
Instead of immediately chastising them, that's what I'm saying, is we seem to have a tendency to do right away. God takes them step by step and prepares them. Now, after 40 years, I give you that, he says you should be more ready than you are.
Yeah, and that really,
And that's when he gets ticked off.
sure, and that is the big problem because we've finally gone through all this testing, and now you should have opportunity to have understood that I will take care of you, and so then what happens? They don't want to go into the land, they send in the spies, and then what?
And then, of course, everything falls apart.
Yeah,
But in this case, instead of immediately chastising them, why don't we just take it as we would a new Christian who is learning what's going on and is still, at times,
right.
kind of waffling. I don't know, I can't use,
No, I know exactly what you're saying. I think it fits totally. Now, part of, the problem is we're just going, okay, chapter 15 is this, chapter 16 is that. And so, we're not getting the feel for it. But again, there is a process that's going forward here. And again, we have to kind of understand that about ourselves. Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
I think we need to realize too that they went 3 days without water.
Yeah,
And there's a physical thing that happens when you go. I mean, the body after 3 days, you've got dehydration.
sure.
Body stops functioning correctly.
And so your mind usually isn't working all that well.
A little bit thirsty, saying,
Yeah,
"Where's our water?"
yeah.
And so, I looked it up just because I was trying to remember, and it's the body. It's about 3 days is how long
Sure.
the body can go without water. So they were kind of at the end of where you physically can
Yeah.
function,
Yeah.
and you're not thinking clearly. You have massive headaches.
Sure.
So they're making decisions also based on feeling, and they're not. They're physically probably feeling pretty bad at this point.
Sure, and we can understand that, and I think we ought to be a little more sympathetic. I think that's what Larry's saying. And so, at the same time, though, we always know that when we're having these things in our lives, that they're there for a reason. And yeah, maybe I'm not going to handle something as well as you handle it. But nevertheless, we're all moving toward a goal and moving through this process of faith. And what we need to do, I say what we need to do, and Larry's saying this, is that we recognize that this is a relatively new situation for them, and I say that in a kind of underspeaking kind of way. And they are going to be going through a whole lot ahead. And so this was kind of the start. Let's see how we handle this. And I mean, they had a lot of reasons for kind of maybe thinking this isn't going to work out so well because of what they're experiencing. But nevertheless, this is a long trip. Now, they're going to make it longer, as it turns out. But That's their problem. Go ahead, Kerry.
Well, looking back on their 400 years in Egypt,
Mhm.
they had no written law.
Right.
What they had with respect to honoring Jehovah was passed on through the patriarchal relationship. We have no idea what that was.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, really at the end of that 400 years, now they see God working, but his target is the Egyptians and those plagues.
Right.
So entering into the wilderness, they're entering into, like you say, a whole new relationship with Jehovah.
Right.
And like you say, it's going to be sometimes a very severe learning relationship, but they've got to learn what God considers righteousness and unrighteousness now that they've never experienced before.
Yeah. And there's always that doubt, I guess, when's God not going to be there for me? Sometimes that can really get you going in ways that, you really don't need to. I don't need to go there. I need to just trust that he got me here, and I need to move forward as best I can. And God knows my weaknesses. He knows what my struggles are. But nevertheless, he's trying. Of course, he's doing it. But he's providing for me and for you a way forward. And that's what he was doing for these people. So, okay, good comments. Appreciate it. Then we confirm the promise in verse 26. Well, obviously, it's interesting. He doesn't just say here, I'll take care of you. He gets kind of specific about it, doesn't he? I'm going to take care of you. You don't have to worry about, you saw all that stuff that I put upon Egypt? It's not going to happen to you guys if you just continue to trust me. All right, now, skip on down to question 5. It says, from 16:1 through 8, we get our water, and then what's the next problem that we have? We don't have any food. And so it's another test. Chapter 16 and I'll read 2 down to 4. It says, the whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and the sons of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat. The cafeteria is looking really good in Egypt at this stage. When we ate bread to the full, for you have brought us into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Okay, as part of this learning process now, okay, what should all the families be doing at this stage based on the way, I'd like to see them get through this. It's like, okay, guys, let's deep breath. I know we don't have food, but God's always come through for us. And so let's be patient and let's trust in him. Okay, so according to verse 4, then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven. This is another miracle. And it's not real bread, this isn't, the stuff that we get on the shelves. In fact, if you read the description enough, you know that it's rather odd-sounding bread. He says, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether or not they will walk in my instruction. So there it is, these tests. And let's just go back to Larry's point, that ultimately, when they get where there are more people, and particularly when it's time to take the land, then we'll see how they've been doing. And it was a struggle, really, for those 40 years. And so I guess in some ways it doesn't surprise us what happened when they were fearful at that time. But anyway, I ask you the question, according to 6:4 through 7, how would the bread be harvested by Israel? How was this supposed to happen? Yeah, okay, it's going to be there in the morning, and they're to pick it up. And they're to pick up what? What's that, Susan? 1 day's portion. Yeah, but what about somebody thinking, we could collect a lot more of this and we could sell it to people who are too lazy to go out and do it. You understand that that's kind of the way people think. And God knew that. And so again, the amount was, this is just for you and for your family. And so what's that building, supposedly? Trust. It's building trust in God. And so what you guys need to do in this test is to realize that each day I'm going to provide it for you.
It's an individual relationship too, because you collect your own.
Yeah,
No slackers that depend on others.
yeah. There were slackers, though. I mean, you remember now, they were told not to do anything on the seventh day, Sabbath day. And what happened on that one? Did some people violate that? Yes, some people violated that. They're at some point, I think, going to realize that what God is saying, every day I want you to trust me and you know that you will provide. Isn't that what we say? Isn't that what we want to really believe God's going to provide for us? I mean, they're learning this great lesson about God providing, and he wants them to trust him. Okay, and then they were supposed to get meat. I'm still trying to picture these quail. You know, I kind of struggle with this, but you know, go back and read this yourself. But anyway, in the evening, they go pick up the quail. Has anyone read anywhere in there where it tells exactly, I mean, what happens and what places them there where they're easily picked up? I don't think so. I just believe that that's what God provided for them. All right, and of course, it's the same thing. Just take what you need for the day. I always think about, you know, is that how most of us live our lives today? We don't have to worry too much about that because we got stores, you know, and you know maybe someday it may not be that way, but nevertheless, you know, we can get something everywhere you might want to go, but what do we generally do? What do you do with your pantry? We got to get that thing full. You never know when it's going to happen. And we all kind of think that, not everybody, some of us are worse than others. You know, I got my little box of Patriot food, you know. And every once in a while, I'll taste it just to see if it still tastes edible. And, you know, I told Judy, I said, hey, this is not what you're going to be used to eating. She still hasn't eaten it yet. So I'm hoping, you know, with pressure, you know, she'll be able to accept it even though it doesn't taste real organic. I guess that would be the best way to describe it. But anyway, you know, I'm prepared. I mean, should I really have to do that? And of course, you know, God gives me a brain. He wants me to use common sense and all that. But nevertheless, I mean, I can see why this would have been a struggle for them to do this. Go ahead, Gary.
It wasn't too long ago we had that problem with toilet paper.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think they were worrying too much about toilet paper, but they probably, if they knew how great it was, they would be probably complaining. That might have been the first thing they complained about. All right, now, so while in the wilderness, describe a typical eating day as reported in 16:13 through 21. Again, so we've already kind of described it. God says, I'll provide the bread, it will be there in the morning. I will provide the meat, it will be there in the evening. You trust me. So that's a typical day. Then when it got to the seventh day, the sixth day, well, then what were they supposed to do there? Gather enough for the 2 days. So that was the day that they were, you know, allowed to double up. And of course, the purpose being, because everybody needs a break on Saturday. No, that's not. Yeah, it's just that was part of the Sabbath day, which was developing. You know, that had already. Well, the law has not been given per se, so I wouldn't say that necessarily has been finalized. But nevertheless, it's just this. You need to take a day. I mean, we can come up with all kinds of good reasons for why they should do it. Now, we know the Sabbath, according to the way it's going to be explained, the purpose of why remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, but you remember it because of what? And Jeff's talked about this a little bit in preparing his class. That means you're supposed to be able to answer that, Jeff. You know, they're all looking at you like you're going to have it. It was the sign of the covenant. So to remember that I took you out of the land of Egypt. So every time you guys take that, there could be a lot of things you might remember, but that's the main thing to remember. So they were to take that time to be thankful, although they were supposed to do that obviously every day, but nevertheless, that was the purpose of it. And there, again, it was just a matter of trust. Any comments, anyone? All right, now, according to 16, 20, and 21, what mistake did the people of Israel make? Okay, they did two different things. The first thing was what did they do with the manna? They were told to eat it all, okay, and not store it. But they left it out there. Maybe someone was thinking, hey, we'll just leave some, we'll get some more tomorrow. Yeah. And what happens? It gets all stale and goes bad. So that showed them that's why I don't want you to do that. And then the other thing was, they gathered it on the seventh day, which they were told not to do. They tried, yeah. Yeah, but what I'm saying, that was in their mind. Yeah, good point, Robert. Okay, explain the extra omerful. I don't think that's a word, but it works for me. An omer was about, if some of you might have looked this up. Anybody look up what amount is an omer? Go ahead, Vicki. 2 quarts, all right. Yes, they're different. 2 quarts, and then sometimes they'll say it's almost 3 quarts. Just depends on the source you're looking at. All right, and then they were then, just kind of as an aside, they were then supposed to fill up that container, and where were they supposed to put it? It was going to be put inside the Ark of the Covenant with the other things that are in there. They would be the tablets, the rod of Aaron, and what's the other thing? It seemed like there was. If anyone thinks about it or flips real fast and finds it, tell me. But it was to go in there. So I mean, this is going to be a pretty significant memory, isn't it? I mean, he wants them to be reminded what? Well, okay, think about it, guys. We're out here in the middle of the wilderness, and we're getting miraculously fed. Why do you think God might want that to be something that would be permanently remembered? This is not going on forever, is it? I mean, it's just the 40 years. Just the 40 years. It wasn't going to go on forever. So this is going to be why would you think God wants it there? He doesn't really explain it in detail. But why? He just tells them to do it. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, right. And so they need to remember that. And with Aaron and his rod, remember what that represented and the commandments. I know there's something else in there, but I know I learned that when I was 6 years old, but we'll ask one of these kids when they come down. Yeah. Okay. So, finally, question 10 says, remember when God provided water for the people at a place called Marah. Okay, in this particular case, what's the difference in this case between the one with the sour water or the undrinkable? Okay, well, yeah, but what was the difference? I mean, that is, the mode was definitely different. We didn't throw any trees around or anything like that. Well, yeah, well, that's another one. Okay, but yeah, the water was there, and there's just no water as far as we know. So he's told to strike the rock. Is that what you said, Edwina? Because there's a time when he's told to strike the rock, and he speaks to the rock as well, or speaks to God or to the people, and that's condemnation. That shows up a little bit later. But anyway, he doesn't commit any error as far as I can see here in that regard. But anyway, there's some differences there. And of course, the people argued with Moses. That sounds pretty similar. And of course, Moses reacts. And he reacts as a guy who's struggling with these steps. And what does he say? Why do you contend with me? Well, it's because you're the one standing there, and you're the one who has this relationship with God. I mean, you know that's why they were doing it. But nevertheless, Moses is already getting up to here. You talk about somebody being tested. He is being tested. I mean, at one point, his father-in-law, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but his father-in-law says to him, you need some help. And so that's when he gets some elders, if you will, to help him up and out in his decision making. So, but I mean, you can imagine his frustration. Okay, so we're out of time, and we'll just stop there. Any other ideas or corrections?
He was 80 and Aaron was 83 when they came out of Egypt.
So what are you thinking about that, Dave?
But you were talking about him being older and starting to wear out.
Oh, yeah.
120 when he died.
Well, we're assuming, God gave them a little extra strength for special wilderness wanderings. But, and people did live a little bit longer then. But nevertheless, there's the time that you're enduring life, correct? Sometimes you just say, I've had too much of this. It's too long. I'm ready to go be with you, Lord. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.